Day 3 to 12 o'clock NN, Bacoor City Police Command Center 3rd floor, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. Madam Laney and Chief Mallory just went out of the room Mark and the three girls were staying. The two wore bitter face after learning everything from Mark. After Mark rested enough, he asked the nurse taking care of Charmaine to call the two and tell them the things the government disclosed back in the mall. He also summarized a bit of his encounter with the military and what happened at the mall. Still, he did not tell everything. He hid things like he had a satellite phone and he could contact the military based at the Bay City. There was no point in telling this to them right now. Actually, it was not that there was really no point, but he just did not want to be pestered about when would the rescue arrive and stuff like that. More than that, this phone was personally given to him by Angeline. It was not a government property for them to demand its use. The two leaders would be the ones to inform the other survivors about the situation. They also told Mark that they were already preparing to leave this place. At this moment, Mark could hear a lot of gunshots from outside the window. The bodyguards and the police along with other able people were moving to procure some of the government vehicles outside. Once enough vehicles were gathered, everyone would hurry up and leave this place. Mark and Abigail's fight at the City Hall rooftop opened the eyes of the people here. This place was not safe at all. Unless they had the ability and skills like the two displayed at the rooftop, they would not survive just by staying at this flimsy and small building. In the room, Mark was also preparing his things. Abigail on the other hand was taking a nap using Charmaine's lap as a pillow. The full usage of her abilities at the rooftop drained the little girl a lot. Talk. Talk. Two knocks sounded at the door and it opened. It was the nurse who was taking care of Charmaine. Apparently, after the doctors and nurses were rescued, they divided to work on treating the injured survivors. On the other hand, this nurse was assigned to solely take care of Charmaine. The nurse was holding two small bags. He handed one of the bags to Mark. Here are the medicines you wanted. All right. Mark took the bag and bundled it with the things he will bring back. In the bag were Charmaine's insulin shots and other medicine of common illness like cold and fever. As for the painkillers and other stuff, he had a lot of stock back in the vehicle, so he did not ask for more. After giving the bag of medicine to Mark, the nurse sat beside Charmaine and the two women started chatting with each other. Mr. Mark, the nurse called out to him. Just Mark is fine. Adding Mr. to my name gives me cringes. Okay then, Mark. Is Charm's proposal for me before still valid? I know I did not give my answer earlier, but... You want to come with us? Charmaine interjected with a happy face. Yes. I decided to come with you if possible. The nurse answered Charmaine's question before turning at Mark. After all, he was the one with the final say. It's fine if Charm wants you to go with us. Still, what changed your mind? Mark was curious. The nurse inhaled and exhaled deeply before answering. I'll be frank. Your fight at the rooftop shook me. I know Madam Laney said that we are going to a safer place, but I doubt that the place is really safe. So I thought that going with your group would be safer. She looked straight at Mark and continued. I know that I'm being presumptuous, but in exchange for the protection I will get, I'll work hard for anything I can do. Even if you wanted something like my body, I won. Wait. Stop. You're going the wrong way. Mark stopped her with a darkened face. Charmaine also hurriedly spoke with a flushed face. Yeah. What are you saying? Don't tell me you fell in love with Big Brother. Charmaine's voice trailed off as she received a stern stare from her big brother. With a serious face, the nurse replied, I didn't. I'm not falling in love or something like that. I just know that I needed to give something as exchange and all I have is myself and nothing else. Don't tell me, you're that kind of woman? I'm not. Mark stared at the nurse and sensed her emotions. She was actually not that willing to say or do it, but she was determined to give up everything she had as long as she could live. Geez. All right. He decided to accept the nurse's determination, or rather, desperation. Big Brother. Don't tell me. What kind of dirty things are you thinking about? Can you use some bleach to cleanse your brain a bit? Goo. With that, Charmaine became quiet. Looking back at the nurse, Mark spoke once more. I'll let you come with us and you will fulfill what you just said except the last one. Hearing that, the nurse felt relieved and somehow insulted at the same time. She was relieved that she did not need to resort to giving up her body but felt insulted since she seemed to not have any charm on Mark's eyes. She was still a woman. Even if she was not beautiful, her looks was still above average. But to Mark, she seemed to be just an ugly woman. Then she came to a realization and she voiced it out subconsciously. Are you impotent? Cough. Cough. Mark choked on his saliva because of what he just heard. Where the hell did that come from? I'm perfectly normal. It seemed that Abigail was disturbed from her nap because of the noise they were making. She slowly opened her eyes and rubbed it. The little girl then stood up and walked towards her papa. Papa is angry. Mark patted her head. I'm not. The little girl nodded and sat on his lap without asking him. Everyone was speechless after that though. It was because Abigail started glaring at the nurse without anyone knowing why. The little girl just sat on his lap while staring at the nurse without saying anything. Abigail's glare made the nurse shiver inside. It was as if the little girl was telling her not to bully her papa. Mark on the other hand sighed. Why is it harder to talk to women nowadays? It was even harder than killing a dozen infected. With that, the room finally became quiet. Mark continued with his work while Abigail sat on his lap staring at the nurse. The nurse on the other hand did not try to move or talk under the little girl's watch. To the side, Charmaine could only smile bitterly. The little girl was actually scarier than the father. 15 minutes later, Chief Mallory came in to tell them that the vehicles were ready and they could leave anytime. It was faster than he anticipated. With that as the signal, Mark called on his radio. Mayor, are you there? Gerger, are we going to fetch you already? It was an immediate reply and even the subject for the call was not needed to be discussed. May's voice even sounded happy. Yeah. Are you watching what is happening? We are. All right. Tell Odell to drive here already. The evacuation will start. Okay. Mark then turned to the police chief. Let's get going. It's better if we leave sooner. We need to get to Firenze before sunset. Isn't it too early? Firenze is just about half an hour from here on car, right? Charmaine interjected. It was before the outbreak. Right now, even just going here from the city mall took us more than an hour when it should be just about 10 minutes normally. Why? There are infected on the street and even cars blocking the roads. Maneuvering through those blockades and dealing with the infected would consume more time than traveling. There are even time we needed to drive back and forth since there are totally blocked and unusable roads. The chief nodded with Mark's explanation while the two women were also enlightened. With that, Mark carried the things he needed to bring while the nurse helped Charmaine walk out. Not wanted to be left out, Abigail volunteered to carry one of the bags. The bag looked too big for her but she carried it without effort. As the first people to be informed, Mark and his group was the first to move. Strange enough, Mark did not get out and just stood by the entrance of the building while holding his assault rifle. Due to this behavior of his, the rest of the group did not dare walk away from him and just waited by his side. The gunshots continued outside as the armed men kept the infected at bay under the chief's leadership. Mark was watching the situation while leaning on the frame of the door. The vehicles procured were several vans and multi-cabs. There was also a black car with a single 8 on the car plate. Cars with these plate numbers belong to congressmen, so this car should belong to Madam Laney. He was also sure that this was a bulletproof car. A minute later, the survivors started walking out of the building in a hurry. They all ran into the vehicles. It was not because they were panicking, but it was instructed by the congresswoman. Everyone needed to hurry since the infected were gathering towards this direction. Soon, a large black modified van arrived. It was Mark's vehicle. The armed men let the vehicle come close to the entrance since Mark had a lot of things he was carrying. The vehicle stopped just beside the entrance of the command center. Then, under the gazes of the people around, the door opened and a very beautiful girl came out of the vehicle. Everyone who saw her froze on their steps and inhaled a mouthful of air amazed. Even the men shooting the infected could not help but stare. And then, under their surprised eyes, the beautiful girl ran towards Mark and embraced him tightly. Everyone choked. The contrast between the appearances of the two was like heaven and earth. If one were to use a Chinese idiom, it was like a flower stuck in a cow's dung. Disregarding the gazes she was gathering, May started examining Mark's body. On the other hand, Mark's face was very dark. Somehow, he was feeling irritated. He could not pinpoint why though, since he could only detect the amazed and disappointed emotions of the people around him. "Gerger, your wounds, is it fine?" "I'm fine. Look, it's already scabbed. Anyway, why did you go out? You're gathering attention, you know that." "But, Gerger, I'm worried." It was then, another woman's voice was heard. "Master, just let her. She was too frantic when you got wounded that I had to snatch the radio away from her." Everyone looked at where the voice came from and saw someone coming out from the driver's seat of the vehicle. It was a beautiful woman. Even though she was not as beautiful as the first girl, her mature appeal hit the eyes of the older and younger men alike. But still, they froze when they realized what this woman called Mark. It echoed into their ears and they were screaming inside. "You too," Mark sighed. He then heard a murmur behind him. No wonder my appeal did not work on him. He decided to ignore that. However, May did not. She started glaring at the nurse like a cat whose tail was stepped on. Mark started pushing May away and looked at Odalina. "Odal, help me load these on the vehicle." He pointed at the things he put beside the entrance. "Yes, master." Odalina then patiently loaded the things at the back of the vehicle. Charmaine then asked while looking at May. "Big brother, your girlfriend?" "She's not, but, okay." Charmaine wanted to continue asking questions, but could she not notice Mark's bad mood while looking at the people staring at the beautiful girl hugging him? Soon enough, the survivors boarded the vehicles. The only people left outside were Mark's group and Madame Laney's group. "Is everyone ready?" Madame Laney asked Chief Mallory. "We actually have 3 people missing." "Huh? Who?" "Garcia and his men." "What? Are they not coming?" "Madam, I think they wanted to come but..." The police chief pointed at the entrance where Mark was. Mark was wiping blood from his nose when he noticed that the 2 people were looking at him. He called out, "You guys ready to leave yet?" Madame Laney realized what Mark was doing. She shook her head. "We are ready." "All right. Lead the way. We'll guard the back when we leave since there are still the infected coming from behind the city hall." Unexpectedly, an arm-sized tree root came busting out of the ground near Mark. The other people except Mark were surprised. Then, the root slowly came in front of him. He raised his head and looked at the huge tree and then back to the root in front of him. He reached it and shook it. Since the huge tree wanted to befriend him, Mark did not deny its intentions. To his eyes, it was better to befriend something like this sentient tree than actually befriending the unstable humans. After he shook the root with his hand, several more roots busted out from the ground in the middle of the street. The roots then started to block the incoming infected. "There's the queue, we're leaving," Mark shouted. They all boarded the vehicles and started to drive away. Strange enough, Mark sat beside the passenger door of his vehicle and the door remained opened. He then started to aim his M16 assault rifle at the entrance of the command center. "Odal, stop the vehicle for a bit," Mark said, and without questioning why, Odalina obeyed. The vehicle stopped by the corner street beside the city hall. Then 3 people came stumbling out of the entrance in a hurry. Their faces were covered with sweat and their expressions were filled with fear and panic. It was the businessman, Garcia, and his bodyguards. "Wait! Wait for us!" the 3 shouted in unison. It was then that the roots blocking the infected receded and the infected started running towards the 3 men who were shouting, "TSST! TSST! TSST!" Several silenced gunshots could be faintly heard. Then, the 3 men shouting fell down and started screaming in pain. Their legs were shot and were bleeding profusely. "TSST! TSST! TSST, 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 TSST. With their screams, the infected became more agitated. The bodyguards disregarded the pain on their legs and started to shoot the incoming infected. However, they were surprised. The infected running after them started falling down on the road before them. There were bloody holes all over their bodies. They started to feel hope. They thought that someone was trying to help them. What they did not notice was that none of the shots were aimed at the head of the running infected. After several seconds, the infected that had fallen started to stand up once more. Then, Garcia and his men could only let out their painful screams as they were voraciously eaten by the biters that had turned into eaters. The screams of the men did not last long, but those who heard them could not help but shiver. Not far from Mark's vehicle, the vehicles of the other survivors also stopped as none of them dared to stray away from Mark's group. Since that was the case, the people on the other vehicles also saw what happened. "Big brother, is that really necessary to kill them?" Charmaine asked. It was not new to her to anyone dying, since she already saw a lot of people fell drenched with their own blood when the infected appeared, but it was a different issue when she saw her big brother killing another person without batting an eyelid. Mark looked at her, shrugging his shoulders. "I did not kill them though." "You just did shot them." The nurse added. "Yeah, I shot them, but I did not kill them. I only shot their legs, you see?" Everyone in the vehicle was speechless. It was true that he did not kill them, but he totally sent them to their deaths. They just did not know that Mark already planned to do this, since he and Abigail returned after that hair-raising fight. If the event on the rooftop where 3 of the Congresswoman's bodyguards died did not happen and Garcia came in front of him to apologize, Mark would have had let them go. However, that was not the case, fueling Mark's desire to eliminate them. After they returned, he noticed that the 3 were trying to hide away from him, as if they would be able to, since it was Mark that we were talking about. Since they were hiding, Mark made they hide some more. At the time he was standing by the entrance, he was actually blocking the way, making the 3 not dare to pass by. When the 3 could not hold it anymore and wanted to go out, Mark immediately sent a strand of energy to the 3. Since Mark could still not control it perfectly and he was not using his hand as a targeting medium, the effect was weaker. However, that weak intensity of the energy was enough to give the 3 a strong splitting headache. If one was to see the 3 on the room they were hiding at, they would be able to see 3 men kneeling on the floor while clutching their heads. They were just normal people after all. The last part of the plan was to let them out after the vehicles left. He then shot their feet, making them not able to escape. Mark shot the incoming biters afterwards. It was to ensure that the 3 would not have an easy way out. The biters would only bite the 3 and go away. Since that was the case, why not turn the biters into eaters? Then, the eaters savored every bite of the 3 men's flesh. Mark glanced at the clustered infected feasting on the bodies of the 3 one last time with indifferent eyes before looking away. "Odal, let's go." With that cue, Odalina drove the vehicle away, and it now led the other cars since it was the only vehicle in the convoy that could deal with the obstacles on the road. Charmaine and the nurse could not help but stare at the ruthless man in front of them. It was good that they were in his good side. When the thought of becoming enemies with him entered their minds, they could only shiver. Still, the 2 could not help but be confused. None of the other people in the vehicle was bothered with what Mark had done. Rather, the beautiful girl and Abigail were even sticking to him like glue. Mark suddenly sensed something and quickly turned his head towards the rooftop of the city hall. His eyes widened, but then, he let out a helpless smile. So, that really was the case. On the city hall rooftop, an 11-year-old girl sat on the edge of the roof. Anyone who would look at her would know that she was not normal. She had a green-colored hair and her pupils also had the same color. Her lips were rose pink and there were small pink flowers hanging on her hair. Wait. No. The pink flowers were actually growing out of her hair. As she sat by the edge, she was watching the vehicles leaving the compound while holding a golden fruit on her hand. She noticed someone looking at her from the black van leading the other cars. She then waved her hand with a smile. The girl looked at the huge tree behind her. Her smile vanished and her face showed a worried expression. Lil bro. How long would you stay like that? To her question, the whole tree shook, making slight tremors on the building. You really can't turn back into a human? The tree shook again, making her disappointed. The girl skipped towards the north side of the rooftop and looked below with a sad face. Below, on the street, thick smoke started to rise into the air while the huge mutated woodman started to turn into ashes. Dad turned into that monster. Mom is still unconscious and you turned into a huge tree. What should I do now? The green-haired girl said while on the verge of crying. She remembered what happened after the infected came and started the slaughter. Her name was Emika and her little brother was named Mikio. They had these names since their father was a Japanese that married their mother who was a local. They had a family of 4. Her dad, her mom, and her 4-year-old little brother. They came here since her dad had to submit papers for the family business they were going to start. Then, the outbreak came. Emika, their dad and Mikio were all bitten and their mom hit her head on the edge of an office table when she fell by accident. She fell unconscious since then. The most severe bite was on her dad who was bitten on his shoulder. She was bitten on her foot and her little brother was bitten on his hand that he even lost 3 of his fingers due to the bite. With all the strength they could muster, they managed to find a place in the first floor to hide. However, things had gone wrong after that. Her father started to turn into one of those who bit them. In order to not implicate his family, her father ran out of hiding in the last second. As the 2 children were also bitten, they knew that they would also turn. They then pulled their unconscious mother and hid her inside a smaller room that had cleaning tools. After that, both of them soon fell unconscious. When she woke up, her hair was differently colored and she did not find her brother anywhere. She then realized that the room was gone and she was trapped inside a huge tree. Surprisingly, she could communicate with the huge tree and was shocked that the huge tree was actually her missing little brother. With her little brother's help, they found their unconscious mom and hid her inside Mikio's huge body. Strangely, she could seem to grow small pink beautiful flowers on her hair. When plucking the flowers, it felt like she was pulling a hair strand out of her head. She could also recall abilities she had after she woke up. She could grow thorns on her skin and she could control her green hair. She could make her hair change length and even move her hair as if it was her arm. On the other side, her brother said that he could create a fruit that should be able to wake up their mom. However, none of them could understand how or why they turned into this and how they had those abilities. The siblings did not care about it anymore. They only wanted their mom to wake up and took this chance with the fruit. Back to the present, Emika looked away from the burning body of her dad and approached the tree. The trunk of the tree opened up and let her in. Soon, she returned to where her mom was lying down. How can we feed this to mom now? Emika sat beside her mom murmuring. The tree then shook, taking her attention. Smash the fruit, you say? Like how mom feed you vegetables? The tree shook again. With that idea, Emika opened her mom's mouth and squeezed the fruit above her mouth. Soon, the juice of the fruit along with its flesh fell into the mouth of their mom. Emika closed her mom's mouth and helped her ingest the contents in her mouth. I wonder if this would really work. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Gerger, what are you looking at? May beside Mark noticed him staring at the city hall behind them. She also tried to look at what he was staring at but saw nothing. I just thought of something. Mark replied with a smile. He then looked at the nurse who was watching his interaction with May. Since you're with us now, can you introduce yourself? Oh, right. I forgot. The nurse was surprised and then fixed her posture before continuing. I'm Melissa Santos, 24, a nursing associate. My hobbies are... Well, stop. You're not in an interview for work or a beauty pageant. You don't need to say too much, geez. Mark did not let her finish talking and stopped her. Noticing her blunder, Melissa lowered her head in embarrassment. After that, everyone's introduction came in order. Big brother, what about her? Why is she tied up? Charmaine said, pointed at the infected student tied up at the end of the seat. You don't have to worry about her. She's Jeanette, I think. She's an infected. Melissa and Charmaine were shocked. Big brother. Why do you have one in here? Don't worry about her, she won't bite. She's also not aggressive like those outside. Really? Well, maybe? Big brother, that's not reliable at all? Ha ha ha. Everyone started laughing as they noticed that Mark was playing with Charmaine. With a red face, she retorted. Big bro. I hate you. She then turned her face away and crossed her arms in front of her. Charmaine really looked serious that it made the scene even funnier. Melissa on the other hand observed the group in the interior of the vehicle. She sighed inside. The vehicle was comfortable and even looked luxurious. It was equipped with a lot of things. Then, Mark's group had a different atmosphere compared to the other survivors she was with before. His group was lively and energetic compared to the people inside the other vehicles that were lifeless and lacking energy. His group was enjoying the current situation of the world while others could only live in fear. She felt that she really made the right decision. Melissa became really confident about it. After the laughter died down, she asked Mark. Can I ask a question? You can, but whether I will answer depends on your question. Mark nodded indifferently. Back there you told us about mutators, but you never told us what you and Abigail are. I can answer that. Abigail here, she should be a mutator. As for me, I'm not. Melissa and Charmaine were surprised. But big brother you. Charmaine interjected. I know what your next question is, but I can't answer that. The only thing I can say is that mutators are people who were bitten by the infected but did not turn and mutated into something else. As for me, I was never bitten by the infected, so I'm not one. Mark's answer to the two only made them more confused. However, Mark already told them that he won't answer, so even if they tried to press for any answer, the two would not receive one. Odal. There is a convenience store near the area we stopped earlier, right? Stop by that place to get more supplies. We have more vehicles right now, so we can carry more. All right, master, leave it to me. With that, Odalina led the convoy outside the convenience store. After stopping, Mark and Abigail jumped off the van and started to clear the infected outside and inside the convenience store. They did not let the other group to help as their guns were not equipped with suppressors. With them participating, it would only bring more infected towards area. When the very few number of infected was wiped out, Madam Laney and Chief Mallory went out of their vehicles and approached Mark. Are we here to get supplies? Madam Laney asked. That's right. You should get your people to take as much food and other necessities as possible. We might not find or stop at other places on the way. Mark replied, making the two nod in understanding. The only reason they could stop at this place was because there were too few infected in the area. In the other places, however, no one knows what they would encounter. Rumble. As they were about to start, they all heard a rumbling sound. The sound seemed to have come from far away, but it was too loud that they even managed to hear it. When they tried to find the direction where the sound was coming from, they all turned back towards the City Hall compound. What they saw surprised everyone. The huge tree started to wither. Its large leaves started to fall off from its branches and the branches snapped like brittle sticks. Soon, the tree started to fall and the building that lost the support from the tree finally collapsed. It created a huge cloud of dust along with the crashing sounds. It was lucky that they had already left the compound, or else, what had just happened was enough to bring them into another round of danger. Day 3 to 12:50 p.m. Day and Night Convenience Store, Nyog Road, Bayanan, Bakor City, Cavite. Mayor, can you get me a change of clothes from the back? Mark peeked from outside the vehicle and asked May, who was inside. Of course, she immediately went to the back of the vehicle and brought new clothes for Mark, who was still all covered in blood. He received the clothes from May and went back inside the convenience store. Gerger. Where are you going? I'm going to change clothes inside the store. I can't change inside the car with all of you girls there. Oh, okay. Mark walked away back inside the convenience store. On the way, Mark could see the survivors hurriedly emptying the store of its goods. Fortunately or unfortunately, The outbreak came so sudden that no one was able to loot this store and was left basically untouched aside from the scattered items, blood residues and disgusting smell of decaying body parts on the floor. The storage was also full. It seemed that the store had just restocked its supply before the outbreak came. It was lucky that there would be no infected coming this way for a while. The sound of the city hall collapsing should have attracted the infected towards that direction. When the survivors saw him pass by, they stayed away from him like plague. They all saw what he did to Garcia's group and were afraid to step into their graves if they offended him in any way. Also, his performance at the rooftop was also fresh in their minds. Mark could fearlessly fight a 9-foot-tall monster. To him, they were like ants. Mark could feel their emotions, but he could care less about them. He took a bar of soap and 1 gallon of mineral water from the back shelf of the convenience store and went towards the toilet. He needed to wash off the blood on his body as it was sticky and uncomfortable. Inside the toilet, Mark started washing his body while contemplating on many things. One of those things was the abrupt change in his mindset. Before the outbreak, he was just a timid loner that shut most of his connection to the outside world. He could act in front of other people, but after the outbreak, his emotions were severely affected and were slowly changing. It was not just a matter of keeping his act. The bloodlust he was feeling was real. One thing was, every time he was using the ability he learned from Freed, he was smiling sinisterly when he used that ability at that fat inmate before. That was very far from his character before the outbreak. He even started to smile during dangerous fights, like what he did when fighting that huge woodman. Empath, mutagen, bloodlust, evolution. Mark was enlightened. His evolution was faster than most people. The mutagen evolves all creatures infected by it slowly. The changes in his body was abrupt, and so is his emotions. Does this mutagen also affects the emotions of creatures infected by it and brings out their beastly instincts? His mind turned towards the condition Odell was before. The savage attitude of Abigail and even the aggressiveness the huge cat displayed, despite the fact that it was obviously a well-groomed house cat. All of it enforces his theory. I guess I could also work on this, or else I'll end up becoming a madman in the future. It's a pity that I can't use that calming energy for myself. Mark shook his head. He was slowly gaining some understanding towards his abilities. He could absorb other people's emotions and use those emotions as energy and release it. The emotional energy he could release also seemed to vary into 2 kinds, positive and negative. The calming energy he could release was actually the positive emotions he could generate. It was just that he could not release it without getting into contact with the target. Along those thoughts, he just wished that the mutagen in his body could make his fear of people vanish into thin air. It was because trying to keep his act all the time was too taxing for his heart and mind. Wiping his arm, he could bitterly smile. The wound that he received from that huge cat was almost healed already, and it already felt itchy that he felt peeling off the scab covering it. Looking at his wounds enforced the thought of expecting the unexpected at this outbreak. The existence of that tree and that girl he saw sitting on the rooftop. The two had similar emotional pattern, but also different. If that girl was a mutator, then that tree should also be one. No wonder it had sentience. He thought at first that the huge tree had evolved too much that it gained sentience, but that was not actually the case. I wonder how I did not detect that girl before, Mark murmured as he started to wear the new clothes he brought. If he detected her in the first place, he might have gained another mutator for his group. However, since the girl did not appear when he and Abigail were on the rooftop, it was safe to say that the girl did not want to go with them. Did she manage to escape the collapse though? He asked himself. It was not because of worry but curiosity. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. While Mark was inside the store, the giggles of the girls could be heard inside the vehicle. It seemed that women were really good at befriending each other. While the children were playing on their phones, the women were chatting about various things, like how Mark met May and Odalina and about the past of Melissa and Charmaine. Charmaine looked at the women in front of her. These women along with her were around Mark and staying around him. It reminded her of the time in the college with her big brother. Charm. Immersed in her thoughts, Charmaine did not immediately hear that Melissa was calling her. When she finally heard her voice, she could see a hand waving in front of her. Charmaine immediately swatted the hand away from her face. "Charm, what are you thinking about? You just suddenly went blank and silent like that." Charmaine shook her head with a smile. "Nothing, I just remembered my college days with Big Brother." "Oh? Can we have more details?" Melissa pressed on. May and Odalina were obviously interested, though they did not say anything. Looking at their interested eyes, Charmaine gave in. "Well, it's nothing much in particular. It's just like back in college. Big Brother was always surrounded by women." The three other women were surprised. Is he that popular before? Even May, who blindly followed Mark almost everywhere, could not believe it. Charmaine realized what was on their minds and hurriedly explained. "It's not like what you three are thinking. Big Brother looked like a scary person, but he was actually kind and even a bit childish back then. Though, he didn't talk too much and was preferred to be always alone. He did not chase away anyone who wanted to stick around him. He was dragged into a newly formed group along with us after he participated in a cosplay event in school. Fortunately, or maybe not, the most popular girls in the school were also in that group. Not boasting, but me and my older sister was included in those popular girls." Charmaine puffed up her chest with pride, making the other women look at her with slit eyes. Still, none of them interrupted her story. Then, the group started hanging out together more often until most of the girls often hang out with Big Brother around, including me. You see, other men looked at us like we were eye candy, and their stares were always uncomfortable and annoying. There were also times that they would try to make a move on us." When Charmaine said that, May nodded. She was always in that situation whenever she goes out. There was one peculiar person back then, though. It was Big Brother. He did not look at us like others. He did not even put his eyes on us. It made us comfortable staying around him, and he would also help us if we need some help. Also, no other men would bother us if Big Brother is around. "Then, did you girls just use Master like a shield?" Odalina interjected with an exasperated expression. "I don't know about the others, but I didn't. I swear. Also, it did not last long. Things happened and the group disbanded soon after. Big Brother was the person who took the most impact at that event and started to stay away from the members of the group." Charmaine added with a sad expression. "What happened?" May asked. However, Charmaine just looked at Odalina and May and did not answer the question. Instead, she said, "It's better for you two to not know. You'll probably go on a rampage after knowing it." Charmaine spoke with a bitter smile. "If you won't tell us, then I'll just ask Gerger," May said with a determined expression. Nevertheless, Charmaine added something that baffled them. "It's better for you not to, as Big Brother. As far as I know, he doesn't remember those events anymore." "Amnesia?" Melissa asked. "I don't know. I did not confirm it myself since I just heard it from the other members of the group. They said that Big Brother doesn't remember the newer members of the group and everything that happened after the second semester that the group existed. It was his close classmate who was also a member of the group that confirmed it." Charmaine replied while shaking her head. Odalina was in deep contemplation about what she just heard, while May was feeling agitated. They were not stupid to not realize that something really bad happened back then that resulted to Mark losing his memories of that time. They were about to continue the conversation when May suddenly turned her head towards the convenience store, making Melissa and Charmaine confused. "What wrong?" Melissa asked, and it was Odalina who answered while shrugging her shoulders. "Master is coming. She behaves like that every time Master returns after going somewhere." The two new members of the group were speechless. Several seconds later, they could see Mark walk out of the convenience store carrying a few bags. The agitated May hurriedly walked out of the vehicle and fetched her Gerger and even took one of the bags he was carrying to help. It could be seen that Mark was confused about her actions. He could feel that she was agitated but could not figure out why. When Mark loaded the bags in the vehicle, he saw the girls inside just staring at him. It made him felt awkward. "What's wrong with you all?" When he asked, they all averted their gazes at the same time, making it even more peculiar. He wanted to do some more questioning, but two people approached from behind. When he looked behind, he saw that they were Madam Laney and Chief Mallory. "Need something? We're already done loading everything we can carry. We just want to ask which route we are going to take so it will be easier to follow." Madam Laney replied to Mark's question. Hearing what they needed, Mark nodded and asked May to get the tablet he brought. There, Mark opened the offline mapping app he downloaded and told the two what route they would take and the alternative routes if ever something went wrong and the first route could not be accessed. The primary route he proposed might be the safest one, which was going through a large private subdivision which was called Città Italia. The main entrance of the subdivision was connected in Molino Boulevard, and its back access road was actually just a few blocks away to the main street that led to Firenze and Charmaine's home subdivision. Then, he told two other routes they could take, but those routes were more populated and even had more detours. While they were discussing the route, Charmaine made her way out of the vehicle with difficulty taking Mark's attention. "Why did you go out, big brother? I just remembered. Are you going to find Carlo too?" "I do plan to check his house later since I don't know where he is." "Why?" "Then, it's better if we check on him first. I met him in the W.C. Ronald's branch his grandfather owned before the outbreak. Maybe he's still there." "Really?" Mark slapped his forehead. He forgot about that detail. "All right. Still, that place is closer but actually more dangerous." He looked at Madam Laney and Chief Mallory. "We'll be having another stop, all right?" It was not a request. He was actually telling them that they could follow him whether they would like it or not, making the two helpless. After all, without Mark's group, their road towards Firenze would be a very dangerous one. There would also be a possibility of all of them not going to make it. In the end, the two helplessly nodded. Turning back to Charmaine, Mark asked, "Why did you just tell this now?" Charmaine scratched her head and replied with an apologetic expression. "I forgot." Mark sighed. It looked like that he was not the only person had forgotten about it. On the other hand, Charmaine only remembered it after she told that story to the other women in the vehicle. It was because in that group, there were three people who truly treated Mark as their older brother. Charmaine aside, the other two were her older sister, Elsa, and Carlo, who was also her classmate that time. Day 3 to 1:32 p.m. Molino Boulevard, Baianon, Bacoor City, Cavite. Along the boulevard, a black armored and apocalyptic-styled van was leading a convoy consisting of 6 vehicles. There were 3 high-ace vans, 2 multi-cabs and a black armored Cadillac. The convoy was following the boulevard going east, southeast. Inside the armored MB Sprinter that led the convoy, everyone was watching a 3D action movie Mark downloaded in the mall before in the large monitor at the back of the vehicle. Mark actually had more horror, gore and zombie apocalypse movies stored in his hard drive, but no one would have the mood to watch those movies at the moment. While the others were watching the movie and Odalina was driving the vehicle, Mark was busy looking outside the window. He was staring blankly outside while contemplating about things. Right now, for him, there were a whole lot of things to analyze or at least create a theory. As he was deeply thinking about things, he could hear the voices of the girls who were watching the movie. It seemed that the movie had already reached the first fight scene. Inside the other vans in the convoy, almost no one dared look at outside the window. Every single time they attempted to do so, all that happened was them seeing the devastation the apocalypse had brought. All they could see were abandoned cars with broken and blood-covered windows. Vehicles that collided into each other, or even worse, busted through a wall or fence. There were even some overturned vehicles. They could also see the remaining rainwater puddles that had not evaporated or sucked under the ground yet. The puddles were not clear-colored but rather, blood-colored, as the rain yesterday washed the blood that scattered across the road. There were also decapitated body parts and decaying corpses left here and there. Not only on the road but the houses and establishments along the road were the same. The windows were broken, the walls were splashed with blood, and there were some that had already turned into ruins. There was even the fact that there would be infected everywhere. Many of them were attracted and even chased their vehicles. Every time they looked outside, They were only reminded of things that could happen to them and things that happened to their families and friends. The morale of the survivors was very low. It would sure take some time for them to get used to the new state of the world right at now. Back inside the vehicle, it looked like that Charmaine was also paying attention to the scene outside the window from time to time. She noticed something and could not help but ask Mark. "Big brother, I just noticed, but why are there too few zombies on the road? Back in the city hall there's just too many." Her question also attracted the attention of the others inside the car. They all turned to Mark waiting for an answer. "Well, it's just my theory, but there should be a single reason to this. Though everyone became infected with mutagen through the air, actual infection started at a single point and not everywhere at the same time. The infection started to spread out from that point, so the largest numbers of infected could only be found in 3 locations." Everyone nodded and waited for him to continue. The first location should be at the ground zero. The second location was where the current infected was still spreading or the front lines of the infection. The last one should be at places where people were gathering. Like you just said, there are more infected back in the city hall. It is because there are people hiding inside. Now, we are nowhere near those locations, so expect to encounter lesser infected. Mark had just finished what he wanted to say when he remembered to add another explanation that was easier to understand. Just think of it like this. These places had less food and prey for the infected, so where would they go? That was really easier to understand and perfectly explained the current number of infected. Since these places had less food and prey for the infected should have gathered to places where there were more people. Their several minutes of travel were smooth. The boulevard had 4 lanes for vehicles for each direction, making it easier to maneuver across abandoned and crashed vehicles. The number of infected also did not hinder the convoy and was easily decimated. If the road was blocked, Mark's vehicle that led the convoy would easily push the cars blocking the road to the side, allowing the convoy to move on. It was fine until they reached the first main intersections of the boulevard. Before the outbreak, the distance between this intersection and the city hall was just 3 to 5 minutes on foot and even just a minute on a vehicle at full speed, but now, they took about 10 minutes to get here due to the obstacles on the road. However, that was not the problem here. The problem was because there was a large traffic blockade of about more than 100 cars blocking the intersection. The convoy could not help but stop and look for a way around. Mark stepped out of the vehicle along with Abigail and started to survey the area around them while eliminating the infected in the area. The police in the convoy along with Chief Mallory also went out to protect the convoy using their riot shields and police batons. It was not the right time to go out and shoot after all. Mark climbed up on the roof of an abandoned van to see further and even tried looking at the fast food just to the right of the convoy. Seeing the situation, he could only shake his head in disappointment. It seemed that the people who created this mess were out of their minds while escaping. In the center of the intersection, the main cause of the blockade could be seen. About a dozen of cars crashed into each other, and the other vehicles that tried to maneuver around the crashed vehicles ended up blocking each other's ways. Even the drive-through and the parking area around the fast food was in the same situation. Mark returned to the vehicle and Odalina lowered the window on the driver's seat. "Master, how is it? It's impossible to get through this. Get me the tablet. I'll try to find another route." Odalina looked behind her and told the girls to hand over the tablet and immediately gave it to Mark. While Mark was browsing the offline mapping app, Abigail could be seen dashing and jumping around, breaking the necks of each incoming infected in the area with a single kick. The police on the other hand applied the block, push and hit strategy. They would block the infected with their shield, push the infected back and hit their necks with the batons. It was quite effective since the number of the infected were not big. Swiping and enlarging the map on the tablet, Mark soon found another route which would go around to the western side of this blockade. "Odal, drive inside that commercial center. It will lead us behind that fast food and we can also stop on the gas station on the other side of the street." Odalina nodded and readied to reverse the vehicle. Mark signaled the police to return to their vehicles as they were leaving. The convoy made a U-turn and drove back for about 3 lots. There they found the entrance of the commercial center. It was a commercial area that consisted of several separated commercial buildings and a wet and dry market further inside. Vehicles could be driven inside the center compound. One of the entrances of the center was connected to the boulevard while the other was on the street next to the fast food at the corner of the intersection. After entering the commercial compound, they were greeted by the gory scene inside. The glass windows of the stores were smashed open and dried up blood could be seen inside almost every store. The only stores remaining intact were the stores that had steel shutters down. Inside one of the closed stores in the wet and dry market, 5 people were huddled on the floor. The group consisted of 2 women and 3 men. The store was small and these people were in no way related to this store at all. Due to that, they could only access the main area of the small retail store and the toilet. It was lucky that this store was selling sun-dry goods, making them able to eat for the past 2 days. The problem, however, was that their water supply had already ran out last night. "What are we going to do now? I'm thirsty," one of the women voiced out in a weak voice. The other people in the group had no way to answer her though and just kept quiet. Then, the ears of the woman who spoke just now perked up. "Do you hear what I'm hearing? I hear vehicles. What are you saying? I don't hear anything." One of the men said, "Yeah, maybe you're hallucinating because of your thirst." The other woman in the group added. When she heard what they said, she could not help but agree. Maybe she was really hallucinating. After all, once a person started to get delirious, they could hear or see anything, and that was the only word that could describe her state right now. Until she heard it again. "I'm not wrong. I really hear it." "Yeah, I also heard it too," one of the men who did not speak earlier said. Because of that, the others perked up their ears and started to hear the sound of vehicles passing by. "Should we ask for help?" the thirsty woman asked the others. "We have no choice, do we? We'll be stuck here and die if we don't." The other woman said, making the 3 men nod. "All right, gather anything we could use as weapons and grab some bags of food. We have to hurry or we will miss them." The man who was acting as their leader spoke and everyone moved immediately according to his instructions. However, the only things they found that they could use as weapons were a pair of broom and dustpan. They were feeling aggrieved but they had no choice. "When we go out, ignore the zombies and run towards the vehicles as fast as possible. We only have one shot at this." While moving inside the commercial compound, Mark and Abigail had to go out and deal with the infected. The road was too narrow and was designed to only allow 2 vehicles to pass at the same time. However, the outbreak left a lot of cars abandoned in the middle of the road, giving them the need to push every single car out of the way. Still, it was easier compared to the situation at the intersection. The only problem they had right now was the incoming infected and the slow pace they were traveling. More and more infected were getting attracted by the sounds of the engine, and the police also started to help to hinder the infected from coming close to the vehicles. After another 7 minutes, they were finally at the last corner of the road. It was the corner of the wet and dry market that led to the other entrance. At that time, Abigail stopped beside her papa and pulled his sleeves while looking at a certain direction. "Gail, is something wrong? Papa, danger." Hearing what she said, Mark looked at that direction and saw nothing. However, 4 people entered his detection area at that time. They were running away from something. Soon the 4 people were on site, 2 women and 2 men. They were all running shouting towards Mark's direction. They all ran like there was no tomorrow despite their weary-looking faces. They tried to avoid all the infected on their way and succeeded, but their panic did not lessen even just a little. "Help!" They all shouted in a chorus while panting. Their voices all sounded desperate and filled with fear. Crashing sounds could be heard just behind them. Then, after a louder crash, a 2-meter mutated infected could be seen running after the 4 while carrying a freshly mutilated body. The features of the infected could not be any more familiar to Mark since he encountered this kind of mutant twice inside the mall. It was one of those that he previously called Fat Mutant, which he now decided to call Dozer. It was because of these mutants' tendency to ram on anything and everything that was on their way between them and their target. However, This dozer chasing the group of survivors looked slightly different. Its body was all bloated as if like a balloon that was ready to burst open. Furthermore, there is a gas-like effect near its mouth. Mark could not help but think of the large woodman back in the city hall. The dozer in front of them should be another level 2 mutation. Hearing the shouts, the police started to get ready to confront the infected and save these survivors. It was their duty after all. However, an unexpected situation happened. Well, **T. Mark cursed. It was because when the dozer saw him, it disregarded the survivors it was chasing before and started charging towards Mark's direction. "Gail, stay here and guard the car. Papa will deal with this guy." Mark did not wait for the little girl's reply and ran off towards another direction, away from the convoy. Day 3 to 1:52 p.m. Commercial Center, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. After Mark noticed that this mutated infected changed its target and was actually running towards him, he did not hesitate to lure it away from the convoy. It was impossible for the vehicles to drive away because of their current location, and the road towards the exit was still littered with several abandoned vehicles. He really did not expect that he would encounter another of these dozers here, and someone that had mutated further. Given the fact that the dozer back in the mall exploded like a balloon and released methane gas, it could surely do the same. If the policeman started shooting this guy when it got near the vehicles, the result would be devastating. Bam! 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 Loud sounds echoed across the commercial center as the dozer bulldozed through all the obstacles just to reach Mark, who was quickly fleeing. Abandoned stalls, metal signage posts, and even vehicles did not manage to stop the charge of the dozer and was pushed aside. Strong. This mutated infected was too strong. Furthermore, it was also too fast. With the speed it was running right now, it was not hard for it to catch up to Mark. It was a wonder how those 4 survivors managed to run away from his guy. He then realized. Maybe, the dead person it was carrying right now delayed it for a bit, giving enough time for the other 4 to run away. Seeing that the cars were pushed aside, Mark's eyes lit up. He started luring the dozer towards the street. Bam! Crash! Bam! Bam! Crash! Bam! Multiple loud sounds echoed as the dozer started slamming its body on the vehicles that were blocking its way. The vehicles crashed towards one another after being pushed aside by the dozer's charge. On the convoy, the people tensely watched the scene unfold. They could see Mark agilely jumping over the roofs of the vehicles with the 2-meter fat infected chasing him from behind. They could not understand why he was not shooting the infected. The 4 survivors that were running away reached the convoy and were assisted by the police and the medical workers that went out of the vehicles. The 4 was assisted into one of the vehicles to tend to their needs. "Chief, what are you doing? Assist him. Shoot the infected." Madame Laney walked out of the vehicle and ordered the chief, as it seemed that the situation was not good. "Don't." However, she was interrupted by a shout coming from Mark's vehicle. When she turned to look, it was the beautiful girl who walked out of their vehicle holding a cool-looking crossbow. She seemed wary with the chief around, but she was seriously looking at her. "Why?" Madam asked the question with a toned-down voice. No matter what, this girl should be Mark's woman. It was not good to offend her. That infected could explode with fire if you shoot it with a gun. Hearing what she said, the policemen who were getting ready to assist Mark shivered. They were already preparing their guns and move out upon receiving orders. "What do you mean?" The chief stepped forward and asked, but they were dumbfounded. When he stepped forward, the beautiful girl actually retreated. Everyone around looked at the chief. Was he that scary? Seeing that the girl seemed to be afraid of Chief Mallory, one of the policemen took the initiative to ask, but before he could even ask he turned speechless. Because the beautiful girl also stepped back, giving all the men a scared look. "Move away, all of you men. Can't you see she's afraid of you all?" Madame Laney pushed them all away. All the men around was crying inside. When the men retreated, the beautiful girl's face looked better. "I'll ask this time, what do you mean with what you just said?" Madame Laney asked in a gentle manner. That infected can release, and its body is full of methane. That is why it looked too bloated." May replied in a low voice. Hearing her reply, everyone around understood. Carelessly shooting that infected could lead to severe repercussions. How did you know? Madame Laney asked again. We encountered one of those back in the mall. When Gerger shot it with this crossbow, it exploded and released a lot of methane. May's reply enlightened the congresswoman. Still, she could not help but wonder why she was calling Mark Gerger. Madame Laney, it's better if we don't get in Master's way. Another voice interrupted Madame Laney's thoughts. It was Odalina, who just went out of the vehicle to look at the situation. What do you mean? Look, Master is paving the way for us. Odalina replied to Madame Laney's question while pointing at Mark, who was already leading the mutated infected along the middle of the street. Then they saw it. All the vehicles blocking the way were being pushed aside, and the space between the pushed vehicles was enough for the convoy to go through. Bam! Bam! Screech! Mark continued jumping over the roofs of the abandoned vehicles to lead the dozer out through the street and even attracting more infected on the way. However, his plan was still going smoothly. Even the regular infected that started to chase after him became collateral damages after the dozer pushed their bodies aside, and some even became mangled after getting squeezed between the dozer and the vehicle in front of it. At the last jump, Mark did not land on the roof of another car but in the concrete after he entered the vicinity of the gas station on the other corner of the intersection right in front of the fast food restaurant where they stopped earlier. Back at the convoy inside the commercial center, Odalina already started to push the remaining vehicles blocking the road aside. Around the convoy, the police and even the bodyguards of the congresswoman that started to help continued on keeping the infected at bay. So far, they did not incur any casualty, which was a good thing. It was then that the radio May was holding rang. Gerger? Mayor, tell Odal to follow the path I opened and head towards the gas station. Try to see if we can get gas from there. Okay. I'll tell her. Gerger? Where are you now? I'm past the gas station now. I'll just lure these guys chasing me away. Wait for me at the gas station. All right. Be careful. Don't worry, I can handle myself. With that, the convoy moved faster and out of the commercial center. The path Mark made using the level 2 mutation dozer was proven useful. The open path between the cars was still a little bit small compared to the width of the MB Sprinter, but it just took a second of push to widen the space between the abandoned vehicles. In about 2 minutes, the convoy reached the gas station. After arriving, Odal immediately jumped off the vehicle and searched for a possible way to get diesel for the vehicle. However, she was disappointed. Without electricity, the fuel pumps would not work. All she could do was gather necessities for maintaining the vehicle like motor oil and other stuff found in the gas station. The other people also went out of the convoy to help. It was also necessary for the other vehicles to be refueled. At their estimate, 2 of the vans they had could only be used one way and could only be discarded once they reached Firenze, which would be a pity. The policemen and the bodyguards proceeded on guarding the group and kept the incoming infected at bay. However, the noise was starting to get louder and more infected started to head towards the gas station. The number of the people dealing with the infected at the moment would not be enough. Luckily, a little girl kept on running and jumping everywhere, killing all the infected she could deal with. It really helped the armed men a lot, and to be frank, Abigail was more efficient in killing the infected than all of the men combined. Swoosh! Swoosh! May also started to help in killing the infected. She was currently using the crossbow pistol Mark made for her. And to say, she was getting better at using the weapon. Boom! While everyone was busy doing their tasks, a loud explosion accompanied by a burst of flames upwards to the sky was seen not far from their location. They could not see the actual cause of the explosion because of the curved road, but they were sure that it happened just beside the road. May could not help but worry since the explosion was too large. Soon, they saw someone coming over from the direction where the explosion happened. It was Mark. He looked tired as he walked back and dealt with some of the infected on the way. When he finally returned to the group, she was greeted by another hug from May, making the men around stare with envy. Mayor, do you really have to do this every time? Mark asked May helplessly. I do. Is it bad? May answered his question with a pitiful expression. Mark could only sigh to this. He then hugged May tightly in return before letting her go. Happy now? To his next question, however, May did not answer and immediately ran back into the vehicle with a reddened face. Papa, me too. Mark looked beside him and saw Abigail, who already raised both her arms waiting for her papa to lift her up. He could only sigh as he picked the little girl up. He did not even notice how this little girl got beside him. He then walked towards Odalina while carrying the little girl in his arms. Master, is this really the time for that? Odalina said with annoyance. She had been disappointed that she could not find a way to get diesel for the vehicle and her master was flirting after he returned. Sorry about that. I'm too tired running away. That fat guy is too fast. I had to give it my all just to run away. If I didn't manage to make it stuck between two trees, I would still be running right now. I'm just refilling my energy. What kind of energy are you even refilling? Odalina felt helpless as she murmured that question. We can't get diesel. Mark suddenly asked Odalina, noticing that she looked down and disappointed. Yes, the pumps won't work without electricity. There are no generators either. I see. Mark understood the situation. This gas station was a small one after all. He looked around the gas station before giving Odalina some instructions. Odal, remember that siphon pump I brought from the mall? Take it out and also get me a crowbar. Odalina was a bit confused what he was going to do but did not question him and took out the items he needed. Papa, I'll help the police fight the infected. All right, just be careful. Mark put Abigail down. She then rushed towards the incoming infected like she was just playing in a playground. He did not know what to say about this. Odalina brought the pump and the crowbar to Mark. After that, he moved towards one of the square metal covers that had yellow paint. Using the crowbar, he pulled off the cover, which was luckily not locked. There, the smell of diesel escaped out of the hole under that removed cover. Odalina was surprised. Master, you also knew about these things? Don't underestimate the abilities of a job hopper, all right? Master, I do not think that it should be something to be proud of. Nah, forget about it. Drive the car here. Oh, wait. Find me an additional hose first. The hole is too deep for the pump. While Mark was doing all those stuff, everyone around was watching him. They could not help but become amazed on how versatile this man was. After that, it did not take too much time until they filled the fuel tank of their vehicle. They also got some extra gallons just in case they needed it. They even managed to get enough fuel for the other vehicles the survivors was riding on. The only struggle they experienced while getting gasoline was the number of the incoming infected that was getting larger over time. Because of that, they did not fill the fuel tanks of all the vehicles and just filled it enough to be driven several more times. Mark also had to join the people who was keeping the infected at bay. With him and Abigail joining forces together, everyone felt more at ease. After gathering the fuel, the convoy hurriedly drove off, leaving the gas station overrun with infected. Day 3 to 2:35 p.m. Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. The convoy had already left the gas station and at about 50 meters away from the gas station, every single person inside the cars was looking at the left side of the road. It was the location where the explosion occurred several minutes ago. What they could see was a large number of burned bodies with two still burning trees in the middle. Everything within the 10-meter radius around the trees were charred and burned. The police, who remembered what May said to them, could not help but swallow their own saliva. It was good that they had been warned, or the consequences could have been grave. They did not even want to imagine what could have happened if they shot that fat mutant infected near the convoy. This scene was nothing to joke about, and yet, the person who was the root of this scene went back to them like he just did some exercise. Inside the MB Sprinter that was leading the convoy, Melissa and Charmaine were staring at Mark with incredulous expression. "Big brother, you did all this right?" To Charmaine's question, Mark, who was tuning one of his radios to the frequency the police behind them was using, just glanced at the scene outside and nodded while shrugging his shoulders. "There were too many infected chasing me that time. I had no choice." Charmaine felt irritated at his expression. She did not know that Mark was really feeling tired at the moment and was not in the mood to talk too much. Since this morning, too many things happened after all. If he could actually sleep at this time, he had already done so. Unexpectedly, it looked like someone noticed his accumulating fatigue. "Gerger, you can rest if you want to." Mark faintly smiled hearing that and shook his head. "Maybe, later." However, it seemed that May was not taking a "no" for an answer. She pulled Mark towards her and made him lay down on the sofa and at her lap as a pillow. Mark, who was feeling tired, was caught off guard and did not manage to resist. The two women in front of them were speechless at the scene. The two of them were there sitting, but the couple in front of them kept on flirting. "Gerger, you should rest," May said in a stern voice, leaving Mark with no way to decline. Knowing that, Mark did not say anything and just let May do what she wanted. She then removed his helmet and started to gently caress his hair. As Mark was looking the opposite direction of May, he could not see what her expression looked like. It did not take long for Mark to slowly close his eyes and fell asleep. May did not know that she just found one of Mark's weak points. This weak point was the reason he fell asleep easily. The proof of this was because it was hard for Mark to fall asleep easily even if he was tired, since the emotions of other people that he was continuously absorbing was actually keeping him from sleeping deeply. Right now, however, he comfortably slept with May's help. Melissa and Charmaine, who witnessed the whole thing, looked at each other and understood each other's meaning. They both fell silent and did not disturb the two. It was because of the satisfied face May was making while watching Mark sleep on her lap and caressing his hair. The rest of the way fortunately went smoothly. There were a few roundabouts and bumping on the way, but it could still be considered as smooth since the numbers of danger they could encounter in the time of apocalypse were enormous. Asterisk, 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 everything was white and Mark could see two shadows waving at him. He could not see their faces, but he could hear their voices saying gratitude and goodbye. The voices were familiar and he was sure he knew them. However, he could not remember for some reason. The shadows soon walked away after saying a few sentences to him. Strangely, he could not speak. He wanted to ask who they were. Bye. When he could not see the shadows anymore, he could hear two females' voices. Geg, big bridge. He tried to listen closer. Gerger, wake up. Mark opened his eyes. He could see May's worried face looking above him. "Mayor, what's wrong?" "Big brother, you're having a nightmare." It was Charmaine who answered his question. He looked towards her and saw his younger sister kneeling in front of him. She also looked worried. Behind her, he could see Melissa also watching his situation. He lifted his body up and sat beside May under their gazes. Mark noticed that he was actually drenched in sweat even though the air conditioning of the car was on. Looking at their worried faces, he spoke. "Don't worry, I'm fine." He patted the heads of the two girls. Their worry finally eased. "How long did I sleep?" "About 15 minutes, I think." Melissa answered his question. Mark looked outside. 15 minutes, Charm, we're not there yet? There are a lot of cars abandoned in the middle of the road. We're already past Città Italia now. I see. Looking outside the window, Mark could see the familiar vacant lots used for farming. Their destination was already close by. The only problem he expected would be the possibility of encountering a huge number of infected, since they would go to an area where 4 malls was actually located near each other. Before the apocalypse, competitions between companies owning mall franchises were very high. This was the result that could be found in many places in the Philippines. Unfortunately, the fast food branch owned by Carlo's grandfather was actually built outside one of the mall, which was the furthest one of the 4 from the direction they were coming from. Mark just wished that there would be no heavy traffic blockade on the road. The next intersection they would go through was frequently prone to heavy traffic. Fortunately, Mark's wish was granted. When they arrived at the vicinity of the first mall before the intersection, they were greeted by a large number of infected. It was a large horde and enough to overturn everything into demise. The thankful thing was that there was still a traffic blockade but not blocking the direction they needed to go. The traffic blockade was on the southern side of the intersection and their destination was on the left turn, which was the northern side. Odal, Mark called while looking at the horde further away in front of the vehicle. Yes, master? Mow those guys down. Yes. Everyone, please hold on to something. Odalina said before stepping on the gas deeper, shifted the gear and started to accelerate the vehicle. On the vehicles following behind, the survivors' faces were looking grim. They could see the large number of infected at further in the distance, and for some reason, their vehicles had no signs of stopping. Inside the multicab which was the police were riding, Chief Mallory's radio started crackling. Chief, keep up with us. We're going to drive through this horde. Hearing that, Chief Mallory's eyes and the policemen around him dilated. What a bunch of lunatics. They could see the number of infected further on the road, and it was nothing to joke at. Their cars will be overturned if they tried to charge through that. Chief Mallory immediately replied, "Are you sure about this? Our cars can't go through that unscathed. We could get stuck there or worse, overturned." Is that so? The police chief felt helpless hearing the indifferent voice in the radio. Let's do this. We'll stop and drive back. We'll wait for your group back there near the farming lots. The chief suggested. All right, that could also work. Hearing that reply, the chief felt relief until, you guys won't be much of help even if you guys tried to go with us anyway. Chief Mallory felt spitting out blood. However, he could not refute it either. There were two monsters riding that vehicle after all. Disregarding that last remark, the chief informed the other vehicles through the radio. The vehicles then stopped, and then everyone watched the black armored vehicle sped off onto the horde, decimating every single infected blocking the way. They soon turned around and drove back to the vacant lots where they could easily see the perimeter of the area and watch out for incoming threats. Bam! 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 Back on the MB Sprinter that was driving through the horde, the wipers of the vehicle was already turned on. The wipers wiped out the blood on the front window as the bodies of the infected splattered blood on it. The V-shaped ram of the vehicle played the huge role of decimating the infected, throwing everything aside due to the strong impact and the shape of the ram. The shape of the ram also lessened the shaking of the vehicle for every infected it hit. While the vehicle was decimating the infected outside, Melissa, Charmaine and Odalina's two children looked pale as they held onto their seats for the sake of living. Looking outside, just how many infected was flocking towards their vehicle? If not over 1,000, it should still be in several hundreds. Yet, they looked at Mark, Abigail and May's faces. They actually looked fine, as if it was just nothing to them. Just like how Moses parted the Red Sea into two, the black armored MB Sprinter mowed down the infected, splitting the horde into two, and even kept going. The vehicle did not slow down even a little and even accelerated further. The vehicle left a whole lot of gore and blood behind. This could be said a suicidal attempt, but Mark decided on this approach after thinking deeply. One of the factors was the weight and speed of their vehicle. It would not be easy for the infected to overturn it, and the V-shaped ram would keep the vehicle from decelerating too much. Another was that they would just check their destination and look if there was anyone living inside. For other people, it would take some time, but for Mark, it would just take seconds. If luckily that Mark found a survivor in there, depending on who the survivor was, he would either save or abandon them. And they will do it as fast as possible. Mark was also confident that this horde would not be able to catch up with their vehicle. In his estimation, the number of biters remaining was far lesser than eaters, and that was to his favor. Mark was right about that. Biters numbered more than eaters, and the ratio between the two was also very in favor of the biters. It was just that most of the biters went after the fleeing survivors, like he said before, leaving just a smaller fraction behind that went for the hiding survivors. The blockade was just ahead, and Odalina drove the vehicle towards the opposite lane, making their way out of the horde. Behind the vehicle, the biters kept chasing on their tail but failed to get close too much due to the higher number of eaters wandering around the area. The four nervous people inside the vehicle finally felt relieved. They actually made it through. Odalina, who was looking at the dashboard mirror, could not help but let out a bitter smile seeing the pale faces of her children. She decided to spoil them a bit later to make up for their fright. Finally, They arrived in front of the W.C. Ronald's branch after pushing some vehicles aside. They parked the vehicle at the front parking. Upon entering the vicinity of the fast food restaurant, the scene that could tell everyone that there would be no survivors was present. Most of the glass walls of the restaurant, both on the first and the second floor, were decimated and broken glass pieces was scattered everywhere. The red blood splashed on walls and floors stands out on the wall paint inside the restaurant premises. However, to Mark's surprise, he actually detected living people. He looked at the left half of the second floor. The restaurant was designed with the second floor dining area only having half the size of the floor. The other half was where the air conditioning, ventilation and other rooftop equipment were installed. And at that half was actually where he detected people. There were 4 of them and every fluctuation was weak. It seemed that all of them were not in the good condition. Gail, let's go. Odell, May, defend the vehicle. I found people on the second floor. Together with Abigail, Mark jumped off the vehicle and ran into the restaurant with his weapons ready. Day 3 to 2:46 p.m. Vacant farming lot, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. Several vehicles were parked beside the sidewalk of the curved boulevard in 2 rows. It was the survivors that decided to wait for Mark and his group's return. They parked the vehicles in this way to reduce the area needed to be protected by the police, the bodyguards and the armed volunteers. Most of the survivors stayed inside the vehicle with only the armed men patrolling outside. It was fortunate for them that the location was a good spot to stop over. The wide road on the west and south area was the wide road while the northern and eastern area was the vast vacant farmland. There were no hiding spots and every movement from all directions could be observed except for some parts of the farmland where the grass had grown taller than 2 meters. The tall grasses, however, were quite far in the distance and could be considered insignificant. The group attracted quite a number of infected after stopping but was efficiently dealt by the police. It was fortunate for them that they did not attract the horde since the horde came after the armored van that tore through their horrifying numbers. At the northeastern side of the convoy, 2 armed volunteers could be heard chatting. The man who was anxiously looking around while sitting on the sidewalk spoke to the other man who stood while leaning on the base of the concrete electric post. "Fred, how long do you think we're going to wait here?" "How would I know, huh, Luke? Why don't you try asking them?" The man called Fred pointed towards the police with his thumb. "Nah, I would rather not. I know that they are protecting us but they still look scary." The man sitting on the sidewalk, Luke, shook his head. Both of the 2 were government office workers before the outbreak and it was obvious that Luke was a timid person. "Why are you scared with them? They are only scary because they have guns. But we also have ours now, right?" Fred boastfully said while tapping on the gun he put on the belt of his pants. Luke only shook his head hearing Fred's sentence. The guy was being too complacent. Just because he had a gun now, he thought that he was comparable to the trained police. Luke had those thoughts but did not voice it since this guy in front of him was quite hard to deal with even back in the office. It was then that Fred turned around and walked towards the farmland leaving the convoy. Luke was about to ask him where he was going when another shout beat him to it. "Hey you there! Where are you going?" Luke turned his head and saw that it was a police officer who asking Fred. To the question, Fred replied, "Boss, nature's call. I can't do it here since there are women inside the cars." "Is that so? Then do it quick and don't go too far away." "All right, boss." Fred replied to the police officer with a smug face before turning around once more and continued to walk towards the middle of the farmland. The guy was really not afraid of the police, especially since he had a gun himself. It was quite common to see people who had this kind of attitude even in the ranks of the police. They felt superior and arrogant just because of the weapon holstered on their waists. He arrived at the middle of the farmland and saw that the people in the convoy would not see him anymore. Looking around, he saw the nearest tuft of tall grass. He decided to empty his tank there. After moving in front of the tall grass, he noticed that the grass was quite thin and there was an open space behind. As he was confident with himself and with his curiosity kicking in, he decided to look. What he found was a 3.5 meter by 2 meter rectangular hole. It was a hole dug by farmers to store water collected from the nearest creek and use the water for watering the crops manually. In fact, the hole was still filled with water because of the rain yesterday. Since there was water inside the hole, who knows what entered the man's head and decided to take a leak there. The sound of flowing water could be heard behind the tall grass as Fred did his thing. Luke, who was still sitting on the sidewalk back on the convoy, was attentively looking around for danger. He also saw when Fred entered inside the tuft of tall grass but did not think too much about it since it was just a small tuft of grass in the middle of the vacant grassland. It was then, "Ah! Help!" They all heard a loud scream. Luke immediately turned towards the group of tall grass. He was sure that it was Fred's voice. Luke immediately flung himself up and sprinted towards the middle of the farmland. Several police officers also went towards the source of the scream. Bang! Midway their sprint, they heard a loud gunshot coming from the same direction where the scream came from. Bang! Bang! As several more shots sounded, the men who went to aid froze. When the gunshots finally stopped, they all continued with extreme caution. But before they could reach the tuft of tall grass, however, the tall grass in front swayed open and a silhouette of a person came out. It was Fred. However, his eyes were all red as if it was irritated, and there was a white web-like root on his face, neck and arms. Furthermore, there was a red mark on his pants. It was blood, and by the shape of the mark, it looked like a bite. "Luke! Help me!" Fred staggered out of the tuft and called out to Luke, who was already nearby. He then fell down on all fours, splattering his arm and pants with mud. He then started wailing in pain and started to roll on the mud while clutching his head. "Fred!" Luke shouted and was about to run when a hand grabbed him on his right shoulder, stopping him from doing so. When they turned around, it was one of the police officers who went to help. "What are you doing? I need to help him." Luke had forgotten his fear of the police due to his panic. He tried to shake off the hand on his shoulder, but he failed to do so. When he was about to retaliate, he heard the police officer speak. "Sir, calm down. It's likely that he was bitten. If you came close to him carelessly, who might also get bitten by him if he suddenly turned." Hearing that, Luke calmed down a bit, but he was still worried. Even though he and Fred were not too close to each other, they knew each other for several years now. Furthermore, he was the only person he knew within the survivors. While everyone was hesitating whether to approach Luke or not, the tuft started rustling and another person came out. It was an infected. The infected was slow and there were several bullet holes on its body. The bullet holes were probably done by Fred. The most noticeable thing, however, was that there were several odd-looking fungi on the infected's face and arms. There were also web-like white roots all over its body. On one of its eyes, a clump of trumpet-shaped white-colored mushrooms were growing. There were also smaller mushrooms on other parts of its body. Looking back at the wailing Fred, he already had the same web-like patterns on his body and was spreading fast. Soon, his actions started to become weaker and he started twitching with his back on the mud. He then stopped moving. After that, under the gazes of the witnesses, Fred's right eye burst into a stream of blood and the same trumpet-shaped mushroom that was stained with blood started growing at a fast pace. It was as if they were watching a growth of a mushroom in fast motion. The scene made all the witnesses fall back in fright and disgust. Fred then stood up and started to shamble towards the men who went for his aid. Luke was crestfallen. His friend just went off like that. "Snap out of it. Quickly deal with those two," one of the police officers bellowed. The frightened police snapped out of their emotions. They needed to deal with the threat first before anything else. Since the two were just moving slowly, one of the police officers decided to deal with the two infected in melee. There were already several gunshots that were fired and they did not want to attract more danger. Under Luke's eyes, the police officer went towards Fred and smashed his police baton towards Fred's neck. That was then. With a puff, the mushroom that had just grown out of Fred's eye released white smoke enveloping the police officer. "Gaw hhh." The police officer then subconsciously released the baton in his hand and staggered backwards while clutching his neck and face. The wind then carried the smoke away towards the other people. Everyone immediately retreated. However, the crestfallen Luke was late to react. He managed to inhale the white smoke. Cough. Gaw. Ugh. sh*t. Luke fell down on his knees and clutched his neck as if he wanted to strangle himself. The other police officers stared wide-eyed on the unexpected scene. They then saw the web-like roots started growing on the two persons who inhaled the white smoke. They finally realized that it was not smoke. The smoke was actually mushroom spores. The two infected then went towards the two victims and bit them on their necks. The two then turned in a matter of seconds. Damn it. Don't get close. Shoot them. Don't care about the noise anymore. Given the signal, they started shooting the four infected and brought them down. Still, no one of them dared to go close at their bodies. Chief Mallory and Madame Laney, who saw the scene from far away, had their foreheads knitted. The other survivors inside the vehicles grimaced. Outside the vehicles, the armed men were crestfallen. They just lost tree-capable men. It enlightened them to the meaning of not letting their guards down. Just one slip up and it could be the end. The armed men looked around. They now needed to deal with the incoming infected that was drawn in by the gunshots. Everyone wished that Mark's group return as fast as possible. Day 3 to 2:47 p.m. W.C. Ronalds, Molino Road, Molino 2, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark hacked the neck of an eater blocking his way inside the restaurant. Since the space inside the restaurant along with the overturned chairs and tables, Mark was having a hard time fighting. Abigail had the same predicament. She could not bounce around and kick the necks of the infected inside the restaurant too much due to the mess and unstable footing. As the time was the essence, Mark stopped trying to conserve ammunition and took out his pistol. TSST. 2 shots and 2 infected fell down and never to stand up again. At that moment, a biter busted in from the northern side of the restaurant through the broken glass walls. However, the biter was greeted by a kick from the little girl, sending the biter flying back outside the restaurant. Attracted by the noise below, several infected went down from the second floor through the stairs and window. Mark could see some infected falling outside the restaurant, creating splat sounds. Huh! Mark suddenly looked up. The number of people he detected decreased by 1 for some reason. It gave him a sense of crisis. After eliminating the infected on the first floor, Mark and Abigail immediately went up. They were greeted by a dozen infected wandering the second floor. Seeing the newcomers coming from the stairs, the infected immediately scrambled towards Mark and Abigail. The little girl was ready to charge when her papa spoke. "Gail, let me handle this." After holstering his pistol back into his belt, he pulled the M16 from his side and flicked the safety lever. TSST, 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 TSST. After more than a dozen shots, all the infected on the second floor fell soaking into their pools of blood on the floor. Mark approached the only staff door at the second floor. It was the door that led to the rooftop outside. Mark could still feel the 3 weak fluctuations from the other side of the wall. He shot the lock of the door. It was a door that did not use a doorknob and only had a door handle and a separate circular lock. After shooting the lock, he kicked the door open and readied his gun just in case. What he saw made him dumbfounded. He saw 5 people lying around the rooftop. 2 of them were already dead. The other 3, however, a man and 2 women, were lying down on the floor together, hugging each other, wearing only their underwear. Day 3 to 2:59 p.m. W.C. Ronalds, Molino Road, Molino 2, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark stared at the 3 people who were huddled together unconscious. "Gail, guard here inside. Make sure that no infected to climb up the stairs." Hearing what he said, the little girl nodded and attentively guarded the stairs. Actually, there was not much need to guard the stairs as the infected was not too adept on climbing up on higher floors. Mark just did not want to make his daughter see the scene outside the door. Even if they were unconscious, 3 full-grown adults huddled and sleeping together in their underwear was not a sight for children to see. When went to her post, Mark approached the three unconscious people. He finally confirmed that the man who was in the middle was the person he was looking for, his younger brother, Carlo. The woman to his right was also familiar. If Mark was right, she was Carlo's girlfriend Sandra. Mark did not recognize the other woman though. The faces of the three were reddish and their breaths were ragged. Kneeling down, Mark touched the foreheads of the three and confirmed that they were all in the same condition. They all had high fevers and their underwear was still wet. Mark found the clothes of the three hanged on one of the machines on the rooftop and the clothes had not yet fully dried up. Mark looked around and noticed that there was no place to hide from the rain in this place. The place was filled with different machines that were bolted on the roof and the walls. If this was the case, these people might have been under the rain for the whole day yesterday. That situation would sure make anyone experience hypothermia. These three huddling closely might have been their last resort to the situation and keep their bodies as warm as possible. These people surely have been stuck here in this place with more than a dozen of infected on the second floor. Mark turned at the two dead bodies. One of them just died and the other might have been dead several hours ago. They did not manage to handle their illness and had probably given up resisting. It was peaceful death if they died while being unconscious. It seemed that touching their foreheads disturbed Sandra and she weakly opened her eyes. Turning her head slowly, she saw a man exuding a scary aura standing beside them. However, she did feel scared at all. She opened her mouth and said in a whisper-like manner, "Please, help us." The weak woman stared at the man but he did not reply. It was then that she felt worried that the man who just arrived had ill intentions. However, the man then moved. He took out a radio from his belt and spoke. "Mayor. Gerger. What is it?" Sandra heard a female voice from the radio. The voice sounded like an angel, as if she was about to fetch them into afterlife. The man who was called Gerger by the female on the radio replied, "Tell Melissa to go inside the restaurant. I'll get Gail to fetch her. Bring 3 towels, medicine for fever and water that isn't cold. Also Mayor, prepare some hot water and cook some porridge on the cooker. You can do that, right?" "All right." Hearing the conversation, Sandra felt tearing up. How could she not realize that those things that the man requested were for them who were lying on the floor in sickness? Their hard days were finally over. Since the outbreak came too sudden, they were stuck in this roof without any preparation. There were actually 8 people back then. Knowing that they would be stuck in here for some time, the 3 tried to go inside the restaurant to fetch some necessities but never came back. Among the remaining 5 of them, only Carlo, her boyfriend, had the courage to volunteer to get food but she did not let him go. After sunset on the first day, they were tired and hungry. However, they had no way of getting food and other things. Then, the accursed rain fell. At first, they thought that it was a blessing since they could at least drink the falling rain, but the rain did not let up until midnight last night. After being drenched with rain and exposed to the cold for long, they all fell sick and their hunger further led them to fall unconscious. With the last resort, she and Carlo removed their rainwater-drenched clothes and huddled together. With no choice left, the other female who was one of the staff in the restaurant huddled together with them. Still, the effect was not enough and they still lost consciousness after some time. Sandra looked at her unconscious boyfriend. His condition was worse than her since he used his body to cover her up from the rain. She raised her weak hand and touched his cheek with a weak smile. On the parking area in front of W.C. Ronald's, May, who was helping Odalina to hold back the infected, received Mark's orders and immediately complied. Odalina also heard what Mark said and realized that something must have gone wrong. She let May do what she was asked to do and was left alone to deal with the incoming infected. Soon, Abigail went out of the restaurant and escorted Melissa, who was now carrying a large bag, back into the restaurant. However, May did not go back to help yet since there were other things she was asked to do. Unfortunately, Odalina was in a dilemma. The horde had finally caught up and the front of the horde was just a few blocks away. This was something she could not handle alone. However, she must not let down her master. She must think of a way to hold these infected back. Looking around, her gaze fell onto the parked and abandoned vehicles. It gave her a good idea. She punched a biter coming her way, breaking its skull, and then, she closed her eyes to concentrate. At that moment, the lower part of her jeans was torn a slit on both sides. Next, a gray bony growth started to cover her feet and legs, while the bone armor covering her hands started to grow and cover her forearms up to her elbow. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Back at the rooftop on the second floor, Mark waited at the side as Melissa administered medicine on the three people. Sandra was conscious, but the other two was not, needing her help to ingest the medicine they needed. "It's hypothermia, isn't it?" Mark asked Melissa. Yes, the symptoms clearly showed it. However, this man's fever seemed to be something else. The temperature was too high, and I could say that his high body temperature is the reason why these two women are still alive. I see, so that's the case. Mark smiled, which made Melissa baffled at his expression. Sandra, who was already helped to sit down and was given a dry towel to cover her body, leaned on the wall behind her while drinking some water from the bottle given to her. Hearing the conversation of the two, she could not help but worriedly look at her boyfriend, who was still unconscious and suffering. She weakly stretched out her right hand and held Melissa's arm, getting her attention. "Please, save Carlo," she said in a muffled voice. To her plea, Melissa gently smiled and said while pointing at Mark with her thumb, "You don't have to worry. Even if you don't say it, my boss there won't watch him die." Sandra looked at Mark, who squatted beside Carlo and was checking his state. "Thank you," Sandra said, filled with gratitude. "By the way, boss, why do you seem happy when he is burning with high fever?" Melissa turned towards Mark and asked, "Just where did that, boss, come from?" Mark replied with a question while looking at the nurse in confusion. "Because you're the leader, right? I'm not your servant, so I won't call you master like Odell, so boss is just fine. Right, boss? Also answer my question first." Hearing her reasoning, Mark shook his head. Though her reasoning was right on point, somehow, he was reluctant to admit it. Furthermore, as if Mark would not notice that she was paying back for the fright she received when they tore through the horde. About his fever, it's likely that it is connected to his evolution. Evolution? Remember what I said about the mutagen changing the bodies of the survivors? Abnormally high fever is one of the symptoms of that. Mark looked at the unconscious Carlo and continued. In his case, maybe, what he will receive would be like stronger body and cold acclimation. How are you sure about that? Melissa looked confused. I forgot to explain it earlier, I think. You see, what the person who was undergoing before evolution experienced before falling into high fever would affect their evolution. Odell's children, for example. They were both mortally wounded before evolution, so they received every high regeneration rate. If you try to wound them now, it would be healed quickly. Wait. I didn't about that? You and Gail aside, Mrs. Odell's children were also abnormal? Melissa stared at Mark wide-eyed. Well, yeah, Odell too. Then May is. Nah, she's normal. The only abnormal about her is her mental state right now. Mark shrugged his shoulders, making the nurse speechless. Sandra, who could not keep up and did not understand most of their conversation, could only understand one thing. Carlo was not in danger and might even be in better state after he woke up. She could finally breathe in relief. Bam! Bam! While the people in the rooftop were immersed in their work, they heard loud sounds coming from the front of the restaurant. Mark jumped onto a machine followed by Melissa to see the situation outside. The scene outside almost made Melissa fall back in shock. The horde was already in front of the restaurant and was trying to pass through the line of toppled cars that somehow appeared. However, that was not the most shocking part for her. At the parking lot, she saw Odalina, whose arms and legs were covered with gray bones, was kicking vehicles, toppling them into a barricade in front of the restaurant. On Odalina's every kick, one side of the vehicle in front of her would lift off the ground, making the vehicle roll on its side, scattering glass fragments and other metal parts around. Now, she understood what Mark had just told her. She then heard Mark's voice asking her a question. Melissa, can we move that other woman? We need to get out of here as soon as possible. Mark was frowning. The horde had already blocked the road in front of the restaurant, Since he was at a vantage point and higher than the ground, he could now make out several familiar silhouettes among the horde. There was a level 1 mutation dozer and even another of that charred-looking infected. There were even some that he saw for the first time. Unfortunately, he would not be able to examine the abilities of those guys due to the existence of the horde. To his question, Melissa replied, "We can, but her body should be handled with care since her muscles are in pain due to her fever." "All right. You two stay here and I'll move them to the vehicle first." After Melissa nodded, Mark lifted the unconscious woman who was covered with a dry towel in a princess carry and brought her out. Before the apocalypse, Mark would have struggled to carry this woman, but his evolution helped him do so. He effortlessly carried the woman to the first floor with Abigail as guard. Upon arriving at the vehicle, Charmaine, May and Odalina's children were surprised to see Mark carrying an unconscious, almost naked woman. The two women wanted to ask questions but stopped themselves from doing so since it was not the time to do so. After making the unconscious woman lay down on the sofa, Mark immediately returned to the restaurant and picked up the fever-stricken Carlo on his back with Melissa's help. Charm was shocked to see Carlo, who was also unconscious. However, she was relieved that he was still alive at the same time. For one last time, Mark went back inside the restaurant to pick up Sundra. Like the unconscious woman, Mark lifted her in a princess carry. Sundra was embarrassed but did not say anything. She knew that these people were their saviors and it was not right to be picky about things. Mark brought Sundra with Melissa and Abigail beside him. With the little girl guarding Mark back and forth into the restaurant, the work went smoothly even if the infected managed to enter the restaurant from the northern side, which was open and connected to the parking lot of the mall beside the restaurant. After settling Sundra inside the vehicle, Mark went together with Abigail to meet Odalina. Melissa returned inside the vehicle since she knew that she was of no help even if she stayed outside. When Mark reached Odalina's location, he could see the barricade of vehicles effectively holding the horde back. After all, the barricade was made with several layers of vehicles toppled together. "What's the situation? Master, we can't use this road to go back. The horde became larger after we attracted the infected from the malls on the side of the road and from other areas nearby. But we can't make a detour either," Mark said while frowning and continued. "The route to north is prone to traffic and there are several schools there. There should be a lot of infected there. We're in a dilemma, aren't we, Master? Let me try something first. If it didn't work, we'll try to find another way." What he said made both Odalina and Abigail look at him. "Master, what do you want to do?" Mark tapped his chin with his right index finger and said, "You'll know when you see it. What you two should do is get on the vehicle and get ready to leave." "But Master, do you two trust me?" Mark looked at his servant and his daughter. Both nodded without hesitation. "Then, do what I said and wait for my orders on the radio." The two agreed and hurried back into the vehicle. Seeing the two enter the vehicle, Mark looked at the horde in front of him. "Well, what will you do at this situation, Freed? As if you will answer." Mark fiddled with his phone. "What music is best for this scene, I wonder? All right, this one." He played the song titled, "The Wind is Blowing," sung by a Japanese idol group from his phone and smiled while his eyes became sharper and his body exuding an unexplainable aura. "Here it goes." After inhaling and exhaling deeply, Mark jumped into tallest vehicle in the barricade, making sure that every infected in the horde saw him. Day 3 to 3:18 p.m. W.C. Ronald's front parking, Molino Road, Molino 2, Bacoor City, Cavite. Gua. Raau. Grar. The noises created by the horde were deafening. On top of a van that was used as barricade to block the incoming horde, Mark stood. His above-neck long hair fluttered along with the flapping sounds of his clothes. Like the title of the song that was playing in his ears, the wind was blowing. It was blowing beautifully. It smelled unpleasant though. Mark's face could not help but turn unpleasant. With the large number of infected in front of him, it was no wonder why the wind smelled so bad. Especially the biters. Their body organs were still functional and thus, their bodies would still excrete urine and feces. Their oddly colored lower body clothes was the evidence to this. Roar. Gra ahhhhhh. However, that was the least of his concerns. Among the horde, there were several figures that started to cause havoc. There were figures of different sizes. All of them wanted to get close to Mark in frenzy. It was what he aimed to do though. Since the first time he encountered these mutated infected, they had been targeting him no matter how many people were on the other side. Back in the mall, the fat man caused his barricade to collapse, leading to the long chase he had to suffer through. There was also the charred infected back when he found Abigail and the female dozer afterwards. Next were the level 2 mutation woodman and the level 2 mutation dozer. All of them were coming after him for some reason. If that was the case, Mark decided to use that to stir up the mutated infected among the horde. That was the reason he climbed up on the tallest vehicle and made sure that every single infected would see him, and he succeeded. When he climbed up, the common infected, which were the biters and eaters, behaved normally, but the mutated ones started to get agitated. They were roaring and trashing everything on their way. He could make out several dozers among the horde shoving away the other infected in front of them. There was also that hulking muscular infected that started lifting up the infected and throwing them out of the way. The hulking infected also killed other infected as it made its way towards Mark. Well, the scene reminded Mark of some people he saw in the internet back then. The mutated infected looked like Korean pop fangirls that saw their idols out of the concert stage. They would come rushing towards their idols despite how tight the security was. Back in the vehicle, with the exception of May, Abigail and Odalina, everyone was worried. Even if they could not hear the roars and moans of the infected outside due to the soundproofing of the van, they could see all the scary figures beyond the barricade of vehicles. They all could see Mark, who calmly stood on a vehicle looking at the horde as if the ones in front of him were just ants. If they were the ones who stood there in front of the horde, it was for sure that their legs would have turned into jelly. They would probably plop down on the roof of the vehicle not knowing what to do. Sundra, who had just been rescued, was not only worried about the infected outside but was also glancing at the woman tied up at the back of the vehicle. Even though she was told that the infected woman was different from those outside, she could not help but be alarmed. It was good that Charmaine was there sitting beside her. Even if they were not close, they were familiar with each other. She could now understand why this group of people came here to find her boyfriend. However, she still felt pity. Among all of them who seek refuge at that rooftop, only the 3 of them made it. She looked at the beautiful girl sitting behind the driver's seat. She was sure that it was her voice that she heard talking from the man's radio. She could not help but feel inferior not only on her looks but also her current expression. There was not an ounce of fear on her face. As if she truly believed that the man outside would bring them away from this predicament. The crackling of the radio was then heard inside the vehicle, followed by a man's voice. "Mayor, tell Odal to get ready. We're going to bust it out of here." It was Mark's voice. Gerger, she already heard it. "All right. Wait for my signal. After that, don't wait for me and drive through." "But Gerger, how about you?" May became worried. "Don't worry about it. I have no plans of getting left behind." Mark put his radio back in his belt while watching the situation in front of him. The mutated infected was still having the brawl of their lives trying to make their way towards him. It was just a pity that the number of the common infected outnumbered the mutated ones. However, they were getting good progress to get to him. He suddenly turned to his right. He noticed some abnormal movement. It did not take a second after he turned when an infected jumped over from the ranks of the horde towards him. When Mark saw it, he was sure that it was another level 2 mutation. The body shape of the infected was odd though. It was a female infected and she was crawling on all fours, however, rather than like an animal. The movements of her limbs resembled more like an insect. Furthermore, her eyes had a holographic-looking texture aside from her pupils. The infected sprang off from vehicle to vehicle, making her way towards him. She opened her mouth and Mark could see her tongue rolled up looking like proboscis, which could be seen on butterflies. She sprang up from another vehicle but Mark did not let her close her. Bang! Mark had drawn his shotgun and accurately shot the mutated infected's head after she got close enough. He would not take any chances for sudden unexpected situations to occur, especially not at this moment that a horde was in front of him waiting for him to get slaughtered. The female mutated infected with a blasted head fell in between the overturned vehicles and laid there motionless. Turning back his head at the horde, Mark knew that it was time for the first step to commence. He let go of the shotgun and kneeled on the roof of the vehicle with one knee. Pulling up the assault rifle from his back, he closed one of his eyes and aimed at the dozers among the horde. He aimed at their bellies and not at their heads though. TSST, 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 TSST. All 8 dozers he could see were shot on their bulging stomachs and started wailing in pain. It was the weakness that only biters and their mutated variants had. However, after their pain subsided, their eyes slowly turned red and they behaved more violently. After Mark shot the stomach of the dozers, the pungent smell of methane started to drift into the air and the density was getting thicker by the moment. Along the spread of methane, the bulging stomachs of the dozers started to deflate in a visible pace. Still, if Mark was closer to their bodies, he would notice that the holes on their stomachs were not only spewing blood but also a huge amount of methane. Soon enough, even Mark could not stand the smell anymore. This was the signal for the second step. He pulled up the backpack behind him and opened it. There, he took several grenades. This many grenades would not really help much against the horde, but with the thick methane from the dozers spread among the horde, the effect would be on another level. He pulled the pin of the first grenade and threw it as far as he could before being followed by another which was thrown much closer than the previous one. He ended up throwing 4 grenades on a fast pace before he jumped down the vehicle. After landing on the ground, he pulled out one last grenade and threw it just behind the barricade before running away madly and lying prone on the ground. Boo! Blaga. Before the sound of the first grenade exploding could enter their ears, it was replaced by the loud sound of flames suddenly spreading in a large area. It was as if there was a storm of fire behind the barricade. They did not even hear the sounds of the remaining grenades exploding as the sounds were overwhelmed by the sound that came from the flame. It was a sudden inferno. Everyone who saw the scene was both amazed and scared. The scene looked like hell on earth. The explosion even pushed away some of the vehicles from the barricade, destroying the line of cars in the process. Mark pressed himself to the ground, letting the wave of heat pass by above him while the people in the vehicle could feel the shockwave created by the explosion. The whole scene only took about half a minute, but it felt longer to everyone who witnessed it. As the wave of heat passed by, Mark kneeled on the ground and took out the radio. Odal. Go. Vroom. Odalina immediately drove the vehicle. The remains of the barricade were still there, but some parts of it was broken down and thinned after the vehicles on the barricade were pushed away by the explosion. Bam! The vehicle rocked hard after hitting and pushing the vehicles blocking the way. However, the armored vehicle was not stopped and rushed out of the barricade. When everyone looked around, they could see the aftermath of the explosion. Hundreds of charred bodies littered the narrow road. Most of the bodies were still burning and many of them were blasted into pieces. The most noticeable thing was the middle of the road was almost clear of the bodies of the infected. They did not know that the straight lane void of bodies was the aftermath of the grenades exploding in a straight line, pushing away the infected to the side before they got incinerated by the ignited methane. Where's Gerger? Maze suddenly voiced out, making everyone look around outside the vehicle. The vehicle rushed out of the vehicle, but they did not see where Mark had gone to. They suddenly became worried. However, their worry was unnecessary. After she voiced out that question, they heard a knock coming from the window. They saw a hand outstretched from the roof of the vehicle and knocking on the window. The radio on May's hand then crackled and they all heard Mark's voice. Don't worry about me. I'm here on the roof. They all sighed in relief. That feeling almost took half of their lives. Mark sat holding onto the metal grid covering the solar panels on the roof of their armored vehicle. He could feel the lingering heat and smell the unpleasant odor in the air. When Odalina pushed away the remaining vehicles on the barricade, Mark used one of the vehicles as a platform and jumped into the roof of the moving vehicle. It was because there was no time for the vehicle to stop and let him in. The explosion might be huge, but it could not kill every single infected on the road. He turned to his left while he was looking towards the back of the vehicle. There, he could see a lot of the surviving infected. There was even the hulking mutated one. Most of them was injured and burned but not dead yet. To most of these infected, these injuries were nothing and they would continue on chasing them. Mark aimed his gun towards the mutated infected. TSST, 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 TSST. The hulking infected did not immediately die after being shot in the forehead. It was hit 2 more times before falling down. Looking at the devastating scene around the vehicle, Mark could not help but feel satisfied despite the fact that his face was all scrunched up. He was satisfied with the success of his plan but disgusted with the unpleasant smell in the surroundings. Who would like the smell of burnt hair, clothing and flesh mixed all together anyway? The vehicle sped past the area where the horde was earlier. As not all the infected was eliminated, the vehicle still ran over some of the surviving infected before leaving the area. Mark looked back at the scene while tightly holding onto the metal bars by his feet. There were dead infected everywhere, burning bodies and bits and pieces of their decapitated bodies. Making a way out would be hard and dealing with the whole horde was even harder. If not for the existence of the dozers and their unreasonable rampage due to Mark's existence, all these feats would be impossible to accomplish. Not only that the mutated infected initiated chaos within the ranks of the infected, the dozers wanting to catch him only spread the methane gas their bodies exude further. Mark looked forward. They were back on track. He was worrying about another matter though. His nose was stuffed with the pungent smell there so he could not tell. He just wished that the smell would permeate his clothes. He just changed these clothes about 2 hours ago and washing the clothes was not possible at the moment. Day 3 to 3:42 p.m. Molino Boulevard, Molino 2, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark sat on the roof of the MB Sprinter while they drove on the way back. The seat was quite uncomfortable but he decided on not entering the vehicle to save time and for the wind to lessen the unpleasant smell that permeated on his clothes. Another thing was this place allowed him to see a better view of the surroundings and he could eliminate any sudden and incoming threat. Not long after, about a minute or so, they finally saw the place where the convoy stopped. It was on the sidewalk between the road and the vacant farmlands on the curved area of the boulevard. However, it seemed that the atmosphere in the group was not that good. After getting closer, Mark could tell that everyone's morale was even lower than before. The area around the convoy was a total mess. There were about 100 bodies of dead infected surrounding the convoy. It seemed that their battle had just ended as the pools of blood and the dead bodies were still fresh. Mark could also see the number of the policemen that were short by 3 people and they were currently encircled around a body covered in cloth. When they arrived, Mark could see the relief and amazement on their faces. While they were struggling with about 100 infected coming after them, the group that was confronted by several hundred infected actually returned unscathed. Furthermore, there was barely any damage on their vehicle. The relief on the faces of the survivors could not be hidden that Odalina and the rest also noticed it. When their vehicle stopped, Mark jumped down and was immediately approached by Madame Laney and Chief Mallory. "What happened here?" Mark asked while looking around. He was not sure why there were a lot of infected here. Even though the number was nothing compared to the horde they encountered earlier, the number was still too many compared to the number of the infected in this area before when they passed by. The infected got attracted here when one of the volunteers fired his gun. He was attacked by an infected covered with fungal roots and had a mushroom growing out of its eyes. Chief Mallory narrated the situation along with what happened to the volunteer and the number of their losses. According to the two, they lost 2 volunteers and a policeman because of the mushroom infected and another volunteer and another policeman because of the infected attracted to the noise. They lost a total of 5 men in the span. Mark and his group was gone. "Have you found the person you were looking for?" Madame Laney asked in curiosity. "We did. He's unconscious but he should wake up sooner or later," Mark said indifferently. He then looked at the sky and the direction of the sun before continuing. "We should hit the road now. It'll get dark soon." What Mark said put on more pressure on the shoulders of the two. It would be more dangerous for them if they got stuck on the road after nightfall. Before the outbreak, this distance away from the city hall was just several minutes, but they all spent a whole lot of time just to bypass the blockades on the road and deal with the dangers around. Actually, Mark wanted to see the mushroom infected they were talking about and take some pictures and videos. To say the truth, the Bluetooth camera on his collar showed that he was recording every single detail of their encounters. It was for documentation and future references if needed. However, their time constraints were getting tighter at the moment. In about 2 hours, the sun would set and it would be hard to continue on the road after that. They must reach Firenze or at least find a place to spend the night and hit the road tomorrow. With that said, everyone immediately prepared for departure. The police was dismayed about the loss of their comrades in arms and wanted to give them a proper burial, but that was not possible at their current circumstances. The best that they could do was to place their bodies away from the road and offer some prayers before departing. What made them dismayed even more was that they could not even approach the body of their comrade that had fallen victim to the mushroom spores and could only look at it from afar, afraid that the body would release spores again. After a few minutes of preparation, the convoy was now back on the road. Mark sat back inside the vehicle after changing into another jacket. It seemed that the smell was too strong that Abigail did not even want to approach him before he changed his clothes once more. He looked at the two unconscious people with a little bit of annoyance. These two sure know how to sleep. The fever of the woman had already ceded and she was just sleeping peacefully. Carlo was another thing though. His fever was still as high as before. There was not much change in his condition. Even though she knew that Carlo was not in any danger, Sandra could not help but worry. Still, Mark and Melissa were sure that Carlo's condition was due to evolution. If not, Carlo would have long been gone to the afterlife already, considering how high his temperature was. Wah! While contemplating about Carlo's condition, a sudden ear-piercing scream sounded inside the vehicle, making everyone flinch. It seemed that the woman had already awoken. Unfortunately, the first person she saw upon waking up was the female infected who was tied up at the end of the seat. Like a cat stepped on its tail, the woman tried to stand up and run away just to bump her head harshly on the roof of the vehicle, waking her up fully and making her squat on the floor in pain. Everyone was surprised at her antics that they did not even manage to get the right expression to look at her. Melissa immediately approached her to calm her down. As a nurse, she experienced these kinds of things from time to time, making her the first person to react. There were times that patients would be delirious after waking up due to the trauma they received before falling unconscious. However, Mark knew at this moment that the woman was just being muddle-headed from sleeping for too long. When the woman finally calmed down, she swept her eyes around and finally confirmed that she was safe. However, her face turned red after realizing how embarrassing her actions have been. When she saw Sandra looking at her, she could not help but avert her gaze. She remembered what she did in desperation back there in the rooftop when they were all dying in cold. Even if it was for the sake of survival, huddling in her underwear with her superior at work in front of his girlfriend was still shameful. Every change in her emotions did not escape the empath in the group. Mark could not help but sigh while shrugging his shoulders. It looked like they really picked up a baggage this time. Though she seemed to have the same temperament as Angeline, she was clumsier and more unreliable. He wondered how this woman could work in a fast food restaurant in that condition. Learning everything that happened while she was unconscious, the woman looked at everyone with gratitude, however, expressing it would come in another time. The convoy had already reached their first stop before getting to Firenze, Città Italia private subdivision. There was a problem though. The huge gates of the subdivision were closed. "Everyone, just stay here. I'll check the gates." Everyone nodded except for the clueless woman and Abigail that did not even ask for permission and just jumped off the vehicle after Mark. He could only shake his head to this but did not reprimand the little girl. She could handle herself after all. Together with Abigail, Mark made his way towards the closed gates. The policemen also went out of their vehicle to guard the perimeter. However, it was unnecessary. The infected at this area had already been killed by them after they attracted them by the sound of their guns firing. Still, it was better to be on guard rather than get caught off guard. Fortunately, the gates were just closed and not really locked. After Mark entered through the pedestrian's gate at the side, he immediately opened the large gates blocking the road. Nevertheless, Mark was not happy about the easy opening of the gates. It was not because there was no action, but the place was too silent. It was normal if they did not find any human, but how could there be not a single infected to be found? Furthermore, he could see marks and dried up blood on the gates, the street and the walls, but there were not a single corpse to be seen. It was really odd that it gave Mark a bad feeling, really bad feeling. However, this was the only road closest to their destination. He might be wrong about his intuition either. Still, it seemed that not only Mark felt something wrong. Abigail was also looking around warily. Her eyes were dilated like a cat sensing her enemy. When he opened the gate, the vehicles slowly drove into the subdivision. The MB Sprinter drove over towards Mark and Abigail's direction. After the convoy entered, Mark was contemplating if he should leave the gates or open or not. In the end, he closed the gates. It was not to let the infected into the subdivision, who knows? Maybe they would need to go through this route once more. Master, is there something wrong? Odalina pulled down the windows of the driver's seat and asked Mark. She could see the unpleasant expression Mark had while he was observing the area. The other people inside the vehicle perked up their ears after hearing the question. It was not them being nosy, but they also wanted to know the situation. You don't feel anything odd, Odal? Mark said while sizing up the surroundings. Realizing what her master said, Odalina looked around and replied. Master, isn't it too quiet? Odalina also felt the oddness of the situation. Also, the place was too clean, odd for a place without people. Should we go back? Odalina asked. We don't have a better choice other than this road. You saw the situation back there where the horde came from. Our alternative route should be there, but the road was blocked. What should we do then? Let's proceed. We'll just be careful. Odalina nodded while the people inside the vehicle who were listening could not help but feel nervous. Would they really encounter danger here? The place looked peaceful though. After conversing with Odalina, Mark approached the police vehicle, making Chief Mallory and Madame Laney to come out of their vehicles. Is something wrong? The Congresswoman asked. Nothing much, but I'll just warn you guys to be wary of the surroundings. What's the matter? Chief Mallory asked, sensing the uneasy atmosphere around Mark. Look around you. Doesn't it look odd that you can see nothing but dried up blood? There wasn't even decapitated body parts or extracted body organs around. Hearing what Mark said, the countenance of the two changed. This was really strange and odd. It was good that Mark mentioned it to them, since they did not realize at all. They just thought that they did not see any infected since the gates were closed. I'm just saying that we should be careful while we traverse this road. Be prepared for anything that can happen and act accordingly. The two agreed to his advice. They knew the other routes they planned as alternative was already inaccessible. This was the last road with the least danger and obstacles. Going back to his vehicle, Mark opened the door and let Abigail inside, but he did not enter. Mayor, my bag. May immediately handed him his bag. Mark stretched his hand and took the bag from May's hand. Gerger. Where are you going? I'll stay on the roof. I just don't feel easy, so it's better if I could act without needing to stop the car. To what he said, May nodded. Gerger, be careful. May approached the door. All right. Mark patted her head before she retreated. Mark closed the door and propelled himself up to the rooftop of the vehicle. With a knock on the driver's window, he signaled Odalina to move on. The vehicle started to move and drove through the private road with the other vehicles behind. Mark sat on the roof warily, observing the surroundings. He would look here and there and look back and forth without stopping. It may cause him a bit of a stiff neck later, but he could just not feel at ease at the moment, as if there was something tugging on his mind. Everything was fine after they left the gates and the drive went smoothly. However, after they exited the Phase 1 area and passed by a vacant lot with a convenience store, Mark's countenance changed. He felt a pressing pain in his head and his eyes turned bloodshot. He turned to his right and his bloodshot eyes dilated. He immediately took out the 2 radios in his waist, one to contact May while the other to contact the radios within the convoy. Pressing the voice input buttons, he shouted, "Everyone prepare. Enemy at 3 o'clock. After shouting, he immediately put back the radios and pulled the assault rifle by his side. He started to aim at the incoming enemy. Everyone in the convoy who heard what he said turned their faces to the right side of the road. Seeing the incoming danger, the survivors had the look of horror on their faces. Even the countenance of the policeman and the congresswoman's group turned grave. "What is that?" Sundra voiced inside the MB Sprinter. However, the only person who could answer that question was sitting on the rooftop getting ready to shoot. And the target, it was a 3-meter-tall dog, rushing towards their direction from the street to the north like a hungry beast with its blood-covered mouth and ferocious golden stare.